The Trent and Mersey, somewhere to take your boat, to go for a walk, to fish perhaps, or just feed the ducks. A place for leisure and pleasure. If you enjoy the canal, you owe a debt of gratitude to men who more than 200 years ago had the vision to make a cut through Alrewas.
See it, Mr. Darwin. An inland waterway linking two great rivers, the Trent and the Mersey, joining the two ports of Hull and Liverpool.
And, no doubt, passing your Etruria factory, Mr. Wedgwood.
Why not, indeed? Why, with access to ports, my fine porcelain and earthenware could be carried anywhere in the world. My heart's set on it.
And there are those whose hearts are set against it. You've heard what the mill owners are saying. People who build canals are taking our water.
See them off. We're a powerful combination. You with your letters and learning, and me with my factories and influence.
I'll grant you that, Josiah. I understand the Duke of Bridgewater is interested.
He most certainly is. His Manchester Canal has cut the cost of transporting his coal by more than half, and as built it comes highly recommended as well.
James Brindley?
He's none finer, so they say.
The fellow is scarcely literate.
He may not be able to spell navigation, but he can certainly build one. He's the man I want, Mr. Darwin. I'll leave the writing to you.
I'll bite land, cut canal, put locks in, make towing paths and build bridges. All that for £700 a mile. From Trent as far north as Harecastle near Stoke. That's what I'll take on. Canal will be about 12 foot wide at bottom and in general 3 foot deep, taking boats up to 70 foot long. They'll be able to carry 20 tons. They'll cost £30. A man and a boy to each boat, and a horse to draw it along canal. What do you say to that?
I'll give you my hand, Mr. Brindley.
Josiah Wedgwood had a dream that inland navigation would make exporting earthenware a cheaper operation. James Brindley was the engineer, he brought the navigators here, a rough-hewn men who drank our beer and built the Trent and Mersey.
Do you know how many of us navvies there were cutting the canals through the Midlands at this time? 1,500, so they reckon. Or local lads mostly. Well, we came from working the land, but the pay was better. When we got it. It was hard work and dangerous sometimes. I had a mate, George Sharp. I met him on the way up from Huddersfield. Well, George's job was to set the fuses that blasted out the rocks from the tunnels. Well, this particular day, George had set the fuse and then he came back to watch with the rest of us. We waited and we waited and nothing happened. So George decided that the fuse had gone out. So he went to relight it. He just got to the tunnel when all of a sudden there was an almighty explosion, like a clap of doom it was. George was killed outright. He was a good mate, was George. We were lucky. There were no hills to blast out round here. There were some problems though.
The problem, Mr. Brindley?
Aye, here, this place, whatever it's called.
Alrewas.
I'll take your word for it, Mr. Darwin. But whatever it's called, there's a great big river right where I want to put my canal.
Now that is a problem.
But is there a solution?
Well, we could perhaps teach horses to swim across and pull boats at the same time. Or we could run river and canal together just for a short way.
I knew you'd have an answer.
Aye, there'll need to be bridges though to carry the towing paths. 7 of them, I reckon. And one of them will have to be a long un. It'll take a bit of thinking through. This section of the Trent and Mersey, where river and canal run together, has caused problems ever since.
This is Alrewas Lock where the canal dropped into River Trent. You see it today on a wonderful sunny morning, but it floods here and it's been a problem with the canal ever since it was built. British Waterways have had to install this elaborate navigation control system because the river rises so rapidly. On the sign here you'll see that there are three conditions. Normal conditions you see today in green, yellow proceed with caution when the river's up slightly, and red do not proceed. And they also on do not proceed lock the locks. I've lived in the village since 1969 and I've seen these fields here completely covered in water quite a number of times. We used to have regular floods in the winter, but now we get them all the year round, and so we get the boats stopped even in the month of August. We have seen queues of boats here waiting to get through, delayed by as much as 3 days. We were having our tea one night and a knock came on our door, and this bloke said, "Does George Burton live there? He works for British Waterways, doesn't he?" And my dad said, "Yeah, that's me." He said, "Only I got my boat down the river and the river's in flood, and I'm a bit nervous about bringing it up the river myself." And we came down here, me and my dad, and the boat was tied up down there, just by that first side bridge, and the river was in flood, quite a lot of water in the river. Anyway, my dad thought he could manage it, so he brought it up here for him, through the lock, and sent him on his way. And he got me a bit of street cred, that. He got me dad a 4-bob tip, that's 20p.
But the closeness of the river and the canal did have some advantages.
There's been a mill in Alrewas since the 13th century, and possibly before. With the coming of the canal, Thomas Dickin, a brewer and textile dealer from Burton, built a new cotton mill in 1784.
Right where Cotton Close stands today.
It was 5 stories high and it employed 300 workers.
It took in raw cotton from South America, the West Indies, and from the southern states of what is now the USA.
£11,000 worth in the first 3 months of 1801.
It sent out knitting yarn and cotton twist to local hosiery firms, and to Germany, the Baltic and Russia.
All carried by canal.
But the hard work of building the cut took its toll. On the 27th of September 1772, with the section to Harecastle not quite finished, James Brindley died.
The canal was completed in 1777 and provided work for lots of people.
My grandparents, George and Clara Burton, worked this canal in the late 1800s and early 1900s between Prestonbrook and Shardlow. Our association, us Burtons with Alrewas, really started in 1901 when my dad was recorded in the census of that year here at Alrewas, and it was a coincidence really because they didn't live here at the time. That's right, isn't it? They didn't live here then. And because their address was given as a Gandhi boat, the canal, Alrewas. They hadn't got a house, you know, so that's where it all started. That's where it all kicked off. My granddad is down as canal boatman, captain, and my granny as his hand or mate. He said they would turn the boat out from Prestonbrook, say around about lunchtime. They'd travel all that day, all that night, all the next day, tie the boat up at Weston-on-Trent, just outside of Stafford, round about 11 to midnight on the second day. And my dad said my granddad used to like to have been on his way by the time the clock struck 3 AM, so they just have something to eat and drink, grab an hour's sleep, and on the way, then straight down here, then straight through to Shadehouse and stop again. And that was
the working life.
They could walk for England, boatmen. They could walk forever.
The teapot in the middle of the table was the one that was on the boat then, and more often than not used for our tea in the afternoon.
And then in the boat also there was Granny got the most lovely pieces of horse brass, and the plates that were all ribboned, and they were so pretty. Her boat was a picture. It really was a picture.
In the early days, there were general carriers and worked this canal down from Liverpool down to Shadehouse. But in the latter years, they carried acid in glass carboys, and they carried it from Trafford Park in Manchester, from Courtaulds Works, down into the Black Country, into Wolverhampton. It was a bit dodgy stuff, I think, that they carried about. You didn't want it certainly anywhere near your eyes, and not on your skin
Not
or
in your
anywhere.
clothes,
Well,
right?
it would burn you. It was really nasty stuff to be dealing with. There was this situation in the tunnel where the towpath collapsed underneath a horse, called pitch black. You could see nothing at all. And my granddad made his way to the front of the boat, tied the horse to the front of the boat, and then they pushed the boat through the tunnel with the boat supporting the horse, keep the horse's head out of the water, till they got to the other end, and then pulled him out onto the bank, you know.
Legging was the traditional way of propelling boats through tunnels.
The boatman, and sometimes the boatwoman, with the help of a professional legger if the tunnel was long, would lie against the side of the boat, brace their legs against the inside of the tunnel, and push the boat through.
Legwork taking over from horsepower.
I've done my share of legging. Not recently though, I must admit. Oh, I like my brasses. I like to be able to see my face in them. Polishing takes my mind off other things as well. And there have been times I've needed that. Like when Harry, our youngest, went away. We were only 6. He wouldn't have gone if been left to me, but Harold said, if he stays with us here on the boat, he said, he'll get no education at all. And he was right. We were never in one place long enough for him to go to school. Oh, but it broke my heart when he went away, even if it were only to my own sister. For the best, though, I think. Yes, it was. He's done well, and we did get to see him in the holidays. Hard, though, when you've already lost one in the cut. Well, mopes in life'll get us nowhere, will it? Let me show you some of me other pretties. A lot of us collect this. It's Measham ware. Oh, look, I love this little bit. It's a little tiny teapot on the lid. And then, of course, there's me ribbon plates, and me crocheting, and me lace curtains. And you'll have seen these, of course. Traditional these are. It's a dipper, this one. Traditional like my bonnet. I got it when I was down on the Grand Union. They don't wear 'em round here, well, not much anyway. It may be a bit cramped and small in here, but I like to have nice things round me. It was big enough to rear 4 children on, though. And the first one was born right here on the boat.
This is the certificate of my mum, Ivy Cluley, when she qualified as a midwife on the 26th of May 1934. She then became the midwife in Alrewas and did 6 villages. It was very rare that she delivered babies on narrowboats, because normally the lady would stay on home ground until she'd had her baby. But I remember her telling me about one particular case where she was called out to a lady in labour on a boat at Fradley Junction, and the doctor was called as well. A complicated delivery, and the lady needed gas and air, but my mum and the doctor couldn't give it to her because of the heating range in case there was an explosion.
An emergency delivery at Fradley Junction sometime after 1934. Could it have been this one?
Oh well, this is the boat I was born on in 1936. the 5th to the 10th outside the Swan Boozer. My granddad couldn't afford to stop here because they wouldn't have got paid for it, so what they done was took me into the middle house alongside the locks, and I was there while the midwife was visiting me and putting me right. And then my dad went and emptied it out at Nottingham with a load of flour, loaded up a spelter for Birmingham, and then on his way back that's when they put me up, and that was the first canal I was took on to Birmingham. This is the cabin I was born in 1936, the 5th to the 10th, and this is the crossed bed as I'd be born on, which would be a flock bed as used to fall down. In here there used to be a family of 4. There used to be one sleeping there, one sleeping here, one under here, and I used to be sleeping underneath the stone, and that was the food cabin for the food, and that's where my bed was under there. Well, as I got older, I used to sleep underneath the tarpaulins, which was rather warm on the sugar and the flour, and you used to bed to your shape of your body, so you ended up with a nice comfortable night.
In days gone by, a trusty horse was every boatman's treasure. Hauling cargo through the cut was much more pain than pleasure. Although his plodding gait seemed slow, just feed him well, he's sure to go. What he leaves will make the roses grow along the Trent and Mersey.
Another time I remember my uncle telling us about a horse they had that was an ex-fire engine horse, because in those days the horses had to draw the fire engine. And every time a bell rang, the horse just shot off along the bank. They bolted. They just couldn't control it, really.
The bolting horse is just one of many stories about the canal and boat people.
Fran was such a strong person, and really nothing ever got in her way of whatever she wanted to do, and a strong character in every way, and it showed up a lot really when she damaged her finger. She was opening the lock with the
windlass,
and it chopped the end of her finger clean off, and I think she just thought, oh, blow that, and she simply picked it up and stuck it back on her finger and wrapped it up with a handkerchief and carried on doing what she'd gone to do.
I remember going down this canal one day and Missy said, oh, it was up that canal going up to Hoppers Wood. Very foggy one morning. We started from here at 5 o'clock and Hilda was driving the boat, and I said, oh, look at them mushrooms in that field, jump off, Joe, and get them. So I jumps off, and the fog eased a bit, and there was a farmer in the field picking up the mushrooms. And I got my jumper full. I had to go and tip him over in his basket. Run after the boat, and the missus said, where's the mushrooms? I said, mushrooms? I said, you nearly got me sent to hell up there. The farmer was in that field. I said, oh, do you see him?
In the mid-50s, the weir round there collapsed, and British Waterways came to repair it. They drew down below Cowbridge at Witchner. They drew the paddles down there, and all the water in the river went down the canal. The section of river below the weir emptied, and of course it was, if you were a kid then, it was magic. There was everything you could do in there, in your wellies, all among the newts and the frogs, you know, and the tadpoles and the odd fish you found in the pools. Fantastic time.
From time to time, the canal locks had to be drained as well.
One of the features of all the locks in Alrewas are these grooves called stop plank grooves. When they need to do maintenance work on the lock, repair work, they drop in heavy stop planks, 5 planks, and they wrap them with ashes, which makes a perfect dam so men can dry off the lock and get in there and do the work.
Whole gangs of men were involved during these stoppages, among them blacksmith Jim Bailey and carpenter Ernest Waterhouse, both from Alrewas. They were based at Fradley Junction. Something else that stopped the canal occasionally was ice, and when the canal was completely frozen, the ice breaker was needed.
During the canals of the frosty weather and the boats was on, they used to have an icebreaker, and there was 16 or 17 horses, and there was about 12 men, 6 on each side of the horse boat, rocking the boat, and many a times they was thrown off the boat onto the ice because the boat used to jump up on the ice.
All that I remember about the ice being so severe was the one year that there was a Swiss lady lived in the village, and she really did long for some ice and snow, and she came. I worked then in the post office, and she came to tell us that I skated into Burton today. She said the ice was firm. Oh, she had enjoyed herself.
I came to this school in 1942 when I was 4 years old, and the headmaster was Mr. McKnight, an amazing man, quite a strict disciplinarian, but also had a sense of fun. When the canal here used to freeze over, as it did most winters, and freeze really hard, he was the first one out to test the ice to see whether we'd be allowed onto it to slide and play. He used to walk through this gate, and he'd get to the edge of the canal and he'd tap like that to see whether there are any cracks or bangs, and then he'd walk gingerly into the middle of it, and we used to stand by the wall with bated breath waiting to see if he vanished through the middle of it.
By contrast, in the warm weather, we just paddled and paddled in Walkfield. The canal was so shallow and low, there was never any fears for us really, and I never ever heard of any problems or children falling in, and we just enjoyed it. Sometimes along with the cows.
Yes, when the cows were turned out at night.
There were no houses across there then.
They would walk in at the side of us, but nobody bothered.
Nobody bothered.
Not much chance of paddling now.
Or skating.
Or seeing an icebreaker in action.
But if you stroll along the canal towpath today, you'll see lots of reminders of its rich history.
This wonderful piece of timber, almost a sculpture, is what the layman would call a bollard. It's actually a strapping post. On the horse boats they had short ropes which the boatmen call straps, and to stop the boat either going in or out of a lock, they pass this short rope, the strap, around this wonderful strapping post. You've no brakes with a horse boat, so the rope was put round this post and bring the boat to a halt. Working downhill as the boat enters the lock, the skipper would pass his strap around this post on the gate, and in one swift movement would close the gate and stop the boat with quite a bang. On all the bridges over the locks in Alrewas, you'll see some quite complicated remains of ironwork. This iron was to protect the masonry of the bridges from the lines of horse boats. Cotton lines are very abrasive, and if you look closely at this ironwork here, you'll see how they're cut into it. Also, this particular piece of ironwork would have had a roller, an actual horse roller that the line passed over. The early canal company were very jealous of their water supply. The Trent Mersey Company established this complicated water system here at Fradley, where the water from above this lock flows over this weir and in a long leat behind the Swan and into a reservoir, and then onto Hunt's Lock, thereby bypassing the Coventry Canal system. When the line of the canal was proposed, this area was open land called Fradley Heath, and in fact the locks when they built them were numbered Fradley Heath 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When Brindley decided this was to be the junction with the Coventry Canal, and the Coventry Canal started building, this hamlet you see, which has now become a famous place on the waterways, Fradley Junction, was established. The well-known Swan Inn was built as part of a row of workmen's houses, canal company employees' houses and warehouses. The block, as you see it now, is virtually original. Behind me on the corner was a toll house. It collected tolls for the Coventry Canal. It was later on a boatman's chapel and is now a garage as part of the house. The big house on the corner was a canal manager's house, and behind it in the trees is an engineer's house. Following on from that, going downhill on the canal, at the British Waterways maintenance yard, which in 1820 was just one building and is now developed into the yard you see today. Where the toilets are now used to be the oil store, and the shop was the timber store. Sometime after 1820, a small community grew up here at Bagnall Lock, based around a pub called the Jolly Boatman. The building you see today below the lock on the towpath side is the old pub, and behind it is the modern pub, which we know today as the Old Boat, but was the Navigation. Opposite the pubs is Bagnall Wharf. Two very attractive houses now, but there were originally three one-up, one-down cottages and a wharf building sticking out, which is still there, still part of the construction towards the canal. So how do we know that the building across the canal was a pub called the Jolly Boatman? The answer lies in here.
This is a lease for the Jolly Boatman pub, which was given to me by Anne and Bob Arnold. I believe they thought it related to this property, although I think you believe differently.
Yeah, I knew the Arnolds, Sally. They were the first occupants of this house after it was converted from a wharf cottage. In my view, the lease ended up here by mistake. The Jolly Boatman is much more likely to have been on the opposite side of the canal, where the towpath is and where there are stables and outbuildings. The interesting thing is the lady who took out the lease, just for 1 year, but we presume it went on, she leased the brew house and the coal house and the outbuildings. So it was probably an ale house here, not licensed for premises. Her name is Mary Hanson, and she obviously couldn't write 6 inches across. I was told by local historian Jack Walker, and I am now personally convinced that this building over here was the Jolly Boatman.
Jack Walker had a fund of information and stories about the canal. He left a legacy of photographs and meticulously made model boats, passed on to his sons Jeff and Edwin.
He started
30 odd
years ago making them, and Harry Arnold would supply him with the plans to scale them down, and he made them, to scale, and everything is as a narrowboat would be full-sized.
Yes, all the implements, the bucket and the doors on the cabin, all painted by hand. They are so small, my father actually had to paint those with a magnifying glass, which is this one here. I think that is a family heirloom as well. Another thing as well was the buffer on the back. He actually weaved that by hand, and he had, I don't know how many attempts to get it exactly right as the real object. And he threaded it on the old cotton reel as children used to in the old days.
And he used to cycle to Fradley Junction and Barton, and he would meet one or two of the old boatmen that were still going, carrying stuff, and they'd give him a lift back to Alrewas from Fradley Junction.
That's right.
On the boat.
Where I'm standing below Bagnall Lock here is the most unusual feature of Alrewas and of any canal. Underneath the water in the towpath is a stream of clear water about 3 metres down. I first saw it when this piece of bank collapsed, and the British Waterways chaps showed me this stream, and Brindley must have hit it when he came through with the waterway, and so he extended what's called the invert, the brick bottom of the lock, along the canal for about 10 metres, and the stream is still there beneath us now, and it runs across the cricket field and down to the Trent.
And your canal is still a source of fascination today, Mr. Brindley.
Aye, but I wasn't very fascinated when I came across that stream.
We're on the ramp leading up to Kent's Bridge from Main Street. The bridge was rebuilt in 1934 and once was some distance away from these buildings here. In the 1870s the canal was owned by the North South Railway Company, who modernised quite a lot of it, and as part of that modernisation they built the links here in the background, which are stables which house a number of horses. Boats passing through would change horses here, and across the road, it was very conveniently situated, was a blacksmith that would have shod the horses that were kept here in these stables.
Gallows Bridge. Was somebody hanged there? Or did it get its name because of its shape? And at the side of it, another building that was once a canal-side mill.
This is one of the oldest canal structures in the village. It's Gaskell's Bridge. Gaskell was a coal merchant and he had the wharf next to the bridge here, and we assume that the bridge has become named after him. You can see the wharfinger's house here, very much modernised, and next to it, where the garden is now, was the actual wharf. Gaskell was mentioned in the early Staffordshire directories in about 1850. This is the wharfinger's house at Gaskell's Wharf. A wharfinger looked after a wharf, either a company's wharf, canal company's wharf, or a private wharf, and he would charge a tax or a toll, percentage of any goods that crossed his wharf.
One of our older residents in the village well remembers the time that the coal boats used to tie up at Gaskell's Wharf, and she was a schoolgirl, and she and some of her school friends used to hitch a ride on these coal boats up to Fradley Junction and then ride back again. When she got home from school, she'd be covered in coal dust, all her lovely white school socks absolutely filthy with the coal dust, and her mother used to say to her, "I know where you've been, young lady."
Like all waterways, the Trent and Mersey back to Parliament had to have milestones, mile markers for calculating tolls. Originally the canal had little tiny, about 1 foot high stones, but in about 1815 the canal company decided to have much more elaborate mile markers, and they had these cast iron ones which were made in the town of Stone by a company called Ranger and Dixon, and they're quite the most elaborate mile markers of any waterway in the country. From 1819 the post stood happily here until 1940, at the start of the Second World War, when all signs had to be removed. The company gave instructions to the employees to dig them up and turn them over. Then a few months later they asked them to collect them in, and this milepost particularly was collected in and stored at Fradley. Strange to imagine, I know it was serious at the time, it's strange to imagine a German paratrooper arriving in Alrewas, landing here and saying, "Where is this Preston Brook?" Crossing the Trent today with a motorboat is easy, of course, but for 200 years boats were horse-drawn, and Brindley had to provide a series of bridges across the Trent Valley here for horses. This that we're standing on is the Quarter Mile Bridge. It's called locally the Quarter Mile Bridge or Alrewas Pier. The bridge I'm standing on today is a modern replacement for the original wooden Quarter Mile Bridge, which was a good 2 foot higher, so boats could come off the canal and go up the main river to Alrewas Mill, bringing in raw materials and taking out finished products. I've stepped into this refuge to avoid a bit of modern towpath traffic, a cyclist, but these refuges were built for boat horses so pedestrians could safely get out of the way of an approaching horse.
This type of lace, the flat lace, was traditional. It was used to decorate shelf edgings, along the edgings of curtains and drapes that hung across the cabin. I started crocheting this sort of crochet because a friend asked me for some. She wanted some strips to go along her cabin windows, And another friend asked me if I did circular crochet because she wanted some to go on her portholes. I don't think it's traditional because most of the boaters didn't actually have portholes in their cabins except in the engine room, and they wouldn't have put crochet lace up there.
Okay, that's some stuff.
This is Witchner Lock House. I lived here from 1978 for a few years. My husband worked for British Waterways as the lengthsman, which merely meant looking after the length of canal from Dallas Street Lock in Burton all the way through to Fradley, just keeping the canal clear, keeping the byways clear, and generally keeping his eye on the length. This footbridge was used primarily by the lengthsman to get across to the other side so he could control the level of the water. Because it's river fed, it varies with how much floodwater there is on the river. The paddles are just up the canal a little bit, and there's some more down at Witchner by the lock. Just enables them to stop the water getting too high.
One of the most interesting features of Witchner is this arm going off where there's a control weir was once an to a navigation that went down to an ironworks on the other side of the A38. Boats went under the A38 and down to what's called Forge Pool, and on the edge of this sort of very historic ironworks, the bellows and the drop hammers of the ironworks would be operated by water running out of Forge Pool into the Trent. For a number of years after the completion of the Trent Mersey, Witchner Lock here was an extremely important place. The reason being that the Coventry Canal ran out of money, and so there's no connection to the south for the boats. So Witchner, being located by the main A38 Ricknell Street, was an ideal unloading place for goods going south from here towards London. The warehouse you see and the crane I'm stood next to are part of that unloading complex that still survive. Witchner has two bridges, and the second one, spanning the whole of the canal, is a good example of how an influential landowner could persuade the waterway company to build an elaborate bridge that was in keeping with his estate. Beyond this elegant entrance to Witchner Hall is the last bridge in the parish and the end of our journey along the Cut Through Alrewas.
To have a lawn terminated by a canal with moving objects, passing and repassing, is a finishing most pleasing.
And if you add the amusement of a gondola to convey you to the many prosperous towns and through some of the most delightful valleys in the kingdom, we have articles of luxury which gentlemen in other circumstances must wish for in vain.
Let's fill a glass and raise it to the people of this story, to those who helped us to look back at the cut and all its glory. And maybe in the future when we're choking on exhaust fumes, then we'll bless those visionary men who built the Trent and Mersey.